Well, everybody, wouldn't you know it, we've made it to episode 7, count 'em, 7 of Movie Night. Here we are to talk about Apocalypse Now. But of course, we've got some housekeeping things to do beforehand. First of all, let me check that I'm recording. It says stop recording, which implies that we are currently recording. The mic is unmuted. Sadly, Elite RE is not here. Can you believe that happened last week, chat? It resulted in our least viewed movie night ever with our The Lighthouse 15-minute quick recap after realizing after an hour and 10 minutes that I had forgotten to press record. Our least viewed episode. Hopefully it's because of that. Maybe people saw the not time limit. What do you call the things? The time stamp? How fucking long the video was, and we're like, well, this can't be very good. Or maybe actually nobody cares about The Lighthouse. I was going to say we've been going down in views every time, but Gaslight has 83 views, whereas Scarface only has 65. Casablanca, is that the one that has the most views right now? I think it might be. Even Roger Rabbit is only 69. Nonetheless, here we are. It's not all about the views here. It's about the films, the movies. I wonder if that comes up. Now, usually, sometimes when I whisper, it doesn't come up because people are recording on their ends, and then we use that one, so it doesn't matter. Before we get into everything, I was transitioning into something, but I forgot with my tangent. You're used to it by this point. We usually announce what we're doing next. Now, the next one is an odd one. We're going to be doing 1001 Nights, which is a 69 anime movie. 69 is the operative word here because apparently it's about sex and stuff. If you recall, if you are a Shabes viewer, and I'm not even talking about Shabes here, I'm talking about Caribou-kun, the main channel, 1001 Nights, I'm trying to type it in now. He made a video. It's the one video, if you were a stream viewer, I used to geek out about this video all the time. 1001 Nights is like an old fucking fable or something, so when I put it into fucking Google, it does not pop up. But Caribou-kun Shaves made a video about this. It's like a little 5-minute video. Apparently this movie is the first in like a trilogy, of sort of a spiritual trilogy of sort of very old, and by old I mean late 60s, early 70s, because this one's made in 69. I finally found it. It's also supposed to be a Tezuka thing, the Astro Boy dude. He made Astro Boy. He made a bunch of other things that are very important to anime history, the godfather of anime or whatever the fuck. Also learned most of this from Shabe's videos. He also made Kimber of the White Lion, which there was a big YMS video on. I never saw the movie or that video. So, he also wrote Dororo, Blackjack, various other things. So yeah, it's the let's just read the wiki page here. 1001 Nights is a 1969 Japanese adult animated fantasy film directed by Ichiya Yamato. But conceived by Tezuka here. Now, maybe the entire genre or whatever, or the type where you search into Kiss Anime and it comes up with all the genres, but shonen's there. And shonen's not a genre, guys. Don't say that or people get very mad. Maybe it's called ecchi because this bloke made the first fucking hentai film, which is what we're going to watch next week. Or I could just be thinking Japanese words sound very similar, because that's not spelt that way. But maybe that's what I thought. But it's in an anime Rama trilogy, which is this spiritual trilogy I was speaking of. Which are all like Tezuka inspired films or conceived of by Tezuka films. There's 1001 Nights, Cleopatra, and then Belladonna of Sadness. I think they're all like weirdly set in like the Middle East. Cleopatra's Egypt. Is Egypt considered the Middle East? Probably not, right? It's just North Africa. Where's Baghdad? Wherever that is, that's where 1001 Nights is set. So it's a kind of obscure but kind of historic anime film. It might be hentai lamau. I know there's at least nudity and sex scenes in it. It's got a very interesting art style. In the Shaves video, he talks about how it blends sort of 60s anime style with a more Western cartoon style. Comes out as something very interesting. If we enjoy the first one, we'll probably watch the second two, and even if we don't, but I usually enjoy most things, we'll probably watch the other two anyway, but not right in a row. When we start to do series here on Movie Night, which we will be doing, because me and Ari want to do Shakespeare and maybe even Star Wars, dare I say it, or whatever. We will probably never do it like back to back to back. It'll probably be like episode 11 is the first Star Wars, episode 27 is the next one, and then we keep going every once in a while. Just like we're staggering like guest appearances. Right now it's just Ari. I'm sure Bacon and Mr. R and everybody will be on at some point. But yeah, so 1001 Nights is next week's movie. Weird anime potential hentai movie from the 60s, from 1969. So basically the fucking 70s here. But it'll be our first 60s movie on Movie Night. Speaking of our first, we got our first 70s movie here on Movie Night as we move into what the fucking video is actually about, which is Apocalypse Now. What a weird... If I was a competent gentleman, I would timestamp this so you could get past all the housekeeping. How far in are we? Nearly 6 minutes exactly. Now we're actually talking about the movie. Apocalypse Now stands, just sat through fucking 6 minutes of talking about hentai. They're not going to be happy about this. Are we actually done with housekeeping though? I think we might be. We've got next week, we've addressed last week. We're up to introducing the movie, I think. Let's move into it. Now, I'm going into this with no notes because I'm lazy and forgot to do them. And actually, I just didn't do them. But I think we can have a pointed discussion here because there is a lot to discuss. I'm not sure if it'll be another full-length movie night like London and Casablanca, etc. All the others have been weird lengths. The Lighthouse would have been a full-length one, but we know what happened there. So, going into Apocalypse Now, obviously, if you look at my letterbox, you would know that I gave it 4.5 stars right now. I initially gave it 4 stars, but the rating is kind of irrelevant. We'll talk about why in a second. Going into this, obviously I've known about Apocalypse Now for a long time. I knew it was a Vietnam movie. I must have seen it in a Watch Mojo video when I was 12 because I've basically always known about it. It's a cool name, Apocalypse Now. Oh, what's that about? Obviously, it's a Francis Ford Coppola movie. This bastard was born in 1939 and he's still going. Obviously, he is the director of the Godfather movies, all 3 of them. To varying quality, some might say. And on Letterboxd, if you go on my favorite movies, Part 2 is listed as my number 1 all-timey favorite movie. Make of that what you will. I obviously like number 1 basically just as much, and I like number 3 pretty well. Those are the only 3 Coppola movies I think I've ever seen, and I mean that in all sense of the words because I've never actually seen a Sofia Coppola movie. For those uninformed, that's his daughter, who is also a patented director at this point, whose movies we do want to cover at some point. Lost in Translation is on the watch list. Lists? I only got 1, thanks. So the Godfather movies are like my favorite thing ever, so obviously I want to see more of his stuff. That being said, these are vastly different films with different styles of acting, different themes, different in every sense of the word. Another interesting thing is this is also a movie he made in the 70s. Obviously, Godfather Part 1, if I am to be the most intelligent man and not check on Letterboxd, but I'm actually waiting to check, is 72 and 74. And this is 79. So he's on top of the world at this point, though I have picked up bits and pieces of the backstory to this film. Apparently nobody did want to make this film and he had to pay for it all on his own, or he had to start his own production company or something. It was a big fucking ordeal to get this movie made, apparently, even though he was probably the king of Hollywood at this point. Did he make The Conversation in between these? Because I just added that to the watch list. Because usually I like to have like one movie from a director and then we'll move into, then I'll add another one later. The Conversation came out in 1974. I actually knew this because I was looking at Oscar nominations historically, and I was like, what won Best Picture of every year? And I was scrolling through and they have all the nominations on the Wikipedia page too, and then I saw that The Conversation and The Godfather Part 2 both were up for Best Picture that year. I think Part 2 won. But that's crazy that one director could have 2 movies up for Best Picture. And especially when like there were only like 5 nominees back in the day. Now there's like 10 for each category. But that's like, man, he was fucking on top of the world at that point. But he's made all these movies. Couldn't get this one made apparently because it's wacky and crazy, and we can get into all of that. I was more so talking about the production of it, but also the movie itself. So going in, it was a Ford Coppola movie. I was like, yeah, this will be fucking sick. 70s movie. I don't think I've ever actually seen anything about Vietnam specifically. Obviously, it's in the background of Mad Men for a lot of the show. I know a lot just societally about Vietnam. It's probably the most relevant war to most conversations. Like, I have family members that were in Vietnam, I'm pretty sure. Extended family members. I don't know any of them too well. I'm pretty sure one of my great uncles, who is in a wheelchair, lost his legs in Vietnam, I believe. I'm pretty sure. Because I know one of them was in Vietnam, and I know one of them was in a wheelchair, so I'm connecting the dots from stories I heard when I was like 7 or so right now. But I even, like, my mum would tell stories of, like, because Australia did fight in Vietnam, of, like, watching the news, and that the draft, like, numbers would be drawn on the news every night, or maybe once a week, probably not every night. And it'd be like people hoping that their birthday or however they decided the draft wasn't going to get called on the news, and thinking that that's like I remember thinking that was like a movie plot in my head when I heard that when I was like 8, because it's like the scariest thing in the world. And I think because I feel like when they tell the story, I have multiple great uncles or whatever that would have fought in the war, and that they had all been drafted. So yes, Vietnam, some crazy shit. Famously, a big loss for America and Australia by proxy. About every war America goes into, Australia tries to tag along. They get little broed the whole time. But yeah, so it is still very relevant of sort of like guerrilla warfare. I guess, and actually, we will probably bring up Black Lagoon a bunch throughout this video, because it is actually kind of relevant, but obviously in Black Lagoon, Vietnam is referenced quite a bit, especially in Roberta's Blood Trail. The paratroopers, the American paratroopers in that, I think a lot of them were in Vietnam. I forget the one main dude's name, but you get flashbacks to him in Vietnam, like defending Vietnamese civilians from like his fellow soldiers that are trying to rape a girl or something. And I think Dutch, though I hear that in the manga this is a fake backstory that's revealed later. It talks about how he was in Vietnam. But that may or may not be true. But there are more Black Lagoon parallels later on that I want to bring up, or just sort of references. But yes, Vietnam's a big beam. There's a lot to be said about it. There's a lot to say about it. Some crazy shit, some awful shit all around, as we understand. But actually seeing a movie of it was interesting, because again, I don't think I've ever seen a Vietnam movie that was directly about it. That being said, this is probably not the best representation, because it's kind of the antithesis of it. It's kind of like watching the subversion first, though I've done that a lot in my life, I think. That being said, getting into the Ford Coppola backstory, obviously there are a lot of Godfather actors in this movie, and that was another thing that was very interesting. I didn't realize until like the day I was going to watch it that Marlon Brando was actually in the movie, and obviously he is very in the movie. I knew Robert Duvall was in it, who is Tom Hagen in The Godfather. He's Kilgore in this. Also Martin Sheen, who is the dude from The West Wing, who's always an old man in things that I've seen him in. Him being a relatively young man here is very interesting. He's obviously our lead. Outside of that, like at the beginning, the senator from Godfather Part 2, I think, is the general and like the highest ranking bloke we meet. The way he talks about Kurtz, whatever Marlon Brando's character's name is, at the beginning is so interesting, especially in retrospect. But yeah, also something that I completely missed the first time, because I'm not a Star Wars nerd like this elite RE prick, was that Harrison Ford is in that scene too. He's like he's like the youngest member when they give Martin Sheen his fucking, what's Martin Sheen's character's name? Benjamin Willard, of course. I got the letterbox thing still up, chat. It's okay. that's giving him his orders. Completely went over my head. I was like, I didn't even think I was like, yeah, I recognize him. But yeah, that was fucking Harrison Ford. Now, the first Star Wars movie comes out in 1978, right? Star Wars Episode 4. 1977, so it's 2 years before this. This prick is already on top of the world. But Empire isn't until 1981 or something, right? And then 1985 is... no. Empire Strikes Back is 1980. And then Return of the Jedi is 1983. All right. Still taking 3 years to get these fucking movies out. What the fuck were they doing? Anyway, Harrison Ford is already a megastar at this point. The 1970s. What a decade for movies, huh? Godfather, fucking Apocalypse Now over here. Star Wars starts. All this bullshit. Nonetheless, so a lot of the crew, no Al Pacino, but a lot of the crew has come over. Who wouldn't want to work with Coppola after he puts you on the fucking Godfather? God damn it. I guess to get out of the meta text of like, oh, for a million beats, this is going to be great. I was having a bit of a meme moment when everybody would show up and be like, he's the Godfather dude. Fuck yeah. When certain people would show up, but the movie is definitely that's not the first thing I think of anything. It's probably the first thing we should have gone over, but here we go. So I guess we usually do a little bit of a plot recap just for people who listen to these but don't watch the movies all the time. Apocalypse Now is about our main boy Martin Sheen, Willard over here, gets a secret mission that does not exist, will not exist. It's a big secretive classified mission to assassinate sort of this rogue commander. No, I'm terrible with military terms. I think I've learned that general is the top, even though that's like the lamest name. Then there's like commander, there's commodore, there's a bunch of fucking titles. He's something. There's captain too, but our main character is a captain. So we're not going to kill another captain. He's bigger than him. Colonel. I don't know if I said that. But Colonel Walter Kurtz. He's sent on a mission to assassinate him. And it's sort of, the movie is more about the journey to get there and what that takes him through. And then it is very much about getting there and meeting Kurtz and all of this stuff. But yeah, that's like the plot. He has like a little crew he goes up the river with. We learn more about them as we progress. They all but one die. Spoiler alert. We watch them sort of die one by one, and sort of feel with them as we go. But yes, that's sort of the movie. It's not a very complicated plot movie. As they go up the river, because obviously the war's going on, they encounter different things, different battles, some of the natives, until they finally arrive. So now I'm trying to figure out, where do we start? The movie is pretty long. It's like 2 hours and a half. Oh, I guess this is also something we should talk about. There are multiple versions of this movie. There's this one, which is true with all these fucking Coppola movies. Well, I guess it's really only The Godfather Part 3 that he's released 17 different times in 17 different cuts. Apparently there's only really two. There's the one I watched, which is the theatrical release, and then there's a later one that adds in a bunch of scenes, because apparently he shot so much footage for this movie, like an obscene amount. Like there was like YouTube comments going on about this underneath the trailer, so it could be complete bullshit. But apparently he shot like 200 hours of footage for this fucking movie. I have to assume a lot of it is just sort of exterior shots, because apparently they went to the Philippines while the Philippines were having a civil war as well or something while they were filming it, because there's like a quote from Coppola saying that Apocalypse Now is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam or something, because they went to a Southeast Asian country in the midst of a civil war to shoot it or something, and they had terrible hardships, and there's like a whole documentary about the making of this movie and how again, I didn't actually watch the documentary, so I'm getting a lot of this from YouTube comments that could be completely wrong, but about how everybody on set got arrested because apparently the dude they'd been buying corpses from was grave robbing corpses, and they weren't like donated corpses. I don't know how you go about buying actual corpses to use in your films. I assume somebody signs a consent form that says for a price to my family, my body can be used in theatrical presentations or something. But apparently everybody got arrested at some point. Everybody was getting sick and a bunch of different things. And Munchkin apparently had a heart attack and all this stuff. A bunch of bullshit went on. So it was a very trials and tribulations. What am I trying to say? What phrase am I trying to get out here? There are a lot of trials and tribulations in the making of this movie. That was a tangent into something, but I forgot how we got to the tangent. But I believe we were at overall thoughts. Oh, we were talking about the two different cuts, of course. Apparently there's... So they were on location, so they would have been shooting a bunch of shit. So that's how we got 200 hours or something. There's no way there's like 3 fucking TV seasons or more of actual scripted content. Though apparently there's the biggest difference in the two different versions. Actually, I think there might be 3 versions. There's like an overly long second version and then the third version that he was more happy with. Now, apparently there's a bunch of French stuff in these 2 versions where at some point in going up the river they end up on like a French plantation. They meet the French or something. I probably should have watched these scenes in anticipation for this, but I didn't. Now that sort of gets into the metaphor, which we're kind of jumping into a more deep element, I guess, or a more detail-driven element before we've done overall thoughts here. But hold on, let me get sticky notes up to make a note. We'll get back to the French. I actually don't want to go there yet. We will do overall thoughts. I was initially talking about how long the movie is. It's about 2.5 hours. We got to get back to the French. I've made a note. French and time travel. That will be the topic of discussion for that part. So the movie is long, and there have been movies I've watched, even movies that I've liked that I've watched for movie night, The Lighthouse, Gaslight, where they have felt long. This movie at no point felt long. Now, I actually would have said while I was watching it that it wasn't clicking as much. I actually described in the Discord, I think, to Miller when I was talking to him, I said that this movie was even more confounding to me than The Lighthouse, where The Lighthouse is pretty confounding. I didn't really understand all of it. It took a lot of talking about it, and it will take many more watches of The Lighthouse, I believe, to fully understand, fully grasp, and fully appreciate that movie, I think. I actually don't think Apocalypse Now is like that. I think you just have to think about it more so than actually rewatch it. Though rewatches probably would help. And I have rewatched a bunch of scenes because I've grown to love a lot of the scenes of this movie. But just noting down, the power of performance is also something we have to talk about. So yes, something in favor of the movie is it moved about at a brisk pace, but it's not even that. And then I was going to say that it like pulls you in and entrances you. Sort of like how I talked about with the miscellaneous insert shot, but that's not really the feeling I had either. There sort of is like a lifeless pull, at least to me when I was watching the movie, of a lot of what happens seems almost unfocused. Now, after you think about it, you realize, oh, it's not unfocused. Now, when people make that point, because I've heard people say that before, at first it feels unfocused, then you think about it, it was all perfect, it was all that you have to see, which is true, but that type of revelation is not the revelation I had about this movie. I think it's intentionally meandering, and there are thematic elements in there that pull it all together, especially the French time travel stuff we can talk about. But sort of lulling you, we are introduced to our main character, Martin Sheen, in sort of this introductory scene, and he's doing monologues, past tense monologues all throughout the movie, so it sort of spoils that he survives or whatever. But it's like, to tell Kurtz's story, I have to tell my own or whatever. And that's sort of the framing device for the whole movie. And he's doing monologues, and our introduction to him is that he is a destroyed human, almost pathetic a little bit. We see him like have a breakdown in his hotel room in Saigon before he's even gone to the front lines, because this is his second deployment to Vietnam. And he talks about how On his first deployment, all he wanted was to go home, and when he was home, all he could think about was the jungle, basically, and how he had to get a divorce and all this stuff. And then he sort of has a breakdown. He punches a mirror and breaks it and cries, and he's getting blood everywhere. And two officers come to get him in the morning to take him to the place where he's going to find out about his assassination mission, his super secret assassination mission that the whole movie's about. And he's in complete mess, and they have to like pick him up and throw him in the shower and everything. And he screams as the cold water. We basically got introduced to him, and this is probably the most vulnerable and the most emotional we see him throughout the whole movie. But he's sort of just. It leaves a lasting first impression. And later you sort of think back and you're like, man, how are these two the same person? And it is very interesting because I want to say that he's a non-character, but I mean it in the best way possible. He's so reserved in sort of a chilling way, which is kind of part of the point by the end when Marlon Brando says that he's an errand boy sent to collect a bill because he's sort of just doing as he's told, motionless, emotionless rather. He's moving, but he's just kind of moving through the motions, I think is the saying I was looking for. He sort of has no direction, and that sort of ties back into that initial monologue of like, all I can think about is someplace else whenever he's never really in the moment. But even then, when he's on sort of the boat with his smaller crew, he is sort of he's like the one most in charge. He's the one we relate to kind of the most. Everybody else seems like they keep making big fuck ups, and he's the only one that isn't. Like when they stop the boat and they kill all the innocent civilians, all of them. There's like 3 of them. Not that that's okay, but I feel like my first statement made it sound like there were more. Though we are killing other civilians for other things. But like the captain is all uptight and stupid. The surfer dude is off his rocker and getting high all the time and making mistakes and giving away their position. The young black dude is kind of abrasive and sort of silly and goofy sometimes. And there's one other one. Oh, and Chef is fucking crazy. And I think in his introductory monologue, when Martin Sheen is giving introductory monologues for his different, for all the members of the smaller boat crew, he says he's like wound too tight for Vietnam, and they have that close encounter with a tiger in the jungle, where the Chef just freaks out. That's his fucking name. That's what we call him, Chef. The Chef, Lance is the surfer. I forget the black dude's name, the young black dude, and I know I'm forgetting all the black people's names. I promise that's not a trend, but I don't remember the captain of the ship's name either. There's another white fella, isn't there? No, there isn't. But yes, I did remember the 2 white fellas' names. Kill me, I guess. Well, it was Chef. And I remember Lance because he screams at him when he's hanging off the top of the bunker when they get to the bridge. Tells him to get down. So we were talking about Martin Sheen's character is sort of having no direction in life, our introduction to him. I don't remember what this whole point was building up to. Oh, we were talking about him sort of being a non-character. Oh, we were talking about overall thoughts and sort of the movie lulling you in. I feel like if I went back and watched it, I would just be engaged. I was engaged the whole time, but I would be more engaged. I would be like, oh, here comes this great part that I really like. So whereas The Lighthouse, I think I have to rewatch to understand, I feel like, and appreciate it. I feel like this movie I would rewatch sort of for pleasure, which I don't think I would ever do for The Lighthouse. Even though this one is probably darker and weirder in some sorts of ways. But there is a weird trance to what this movie, where you feel the journey. But even in other things where I would say like you feel the journey, like Lord of the Rings, after you're at the end of like, or even like partway through this, like you're like 5 hours into this fucking 9-hour fucking epic, you feel the journey, and by the end you can't help but feel massive resolution and feel like these 7 endings are fucking worth it because of all you've gone through, or anything like that. I even feel like the Attack on Titan finale had a lot of great, like, oh, it feels like we've gone through a long journey at this point, and it feels like great relief that it's over. Those 2 examples are sort of examples of feeling the journey. It's a completely different feeling with this movie, but I don't know how else to describe it. You feel like, I guess you feel like they're sort of getting through the skin of their teeth each time, because usually somebody is dying in each of these encounters. So that probably creates that feeling, but yeah. It's also exhausting. A big theme throughout the movie is how exhausting the fucking whole war is. And it sort of progresses throughout the movie, because in the beginning it's a fun time with Kilgore and the surfing and etc. And it slowly continues until it gets more miserable and more miserable, especially when you get to the bridge and the no commanding officer stuff. I guess this is where I don't know how I can expand on sort of the trance the movie puts you in. It'll definitely be something I have to think about more. And I think that, and more specifically, I think that's probably more specific to a first watching. So it's kind of, if I went back to watch it to try and explain that more, I don't think I could. I think it would be a very different experience, as all rewatches usually are. The power of performance, even some metatext stuff we can talk about here, which we're going to be talking about Brando a little bit. This movie has some incredible performances. And I feel like Martin Sheen's is understated, but it's great. But the other two big ones are Robert Duvall and Marlon Brando. So we're going these fucking Godfather actors. Can you believe it? The Corleone family, they can fucking act. Robert Duvall is Kilgore. That's his fucking name, unironically, which is kind of fitting. Just an incredible performance. I think I was watching a YouTube video that was analyzing certain things, saying that he was only on screen for 11 minutes, which is insane. Kurtz is probably only on screen for probably about the same amount of time. Depends how you define on screen, because he's in shadow for a lot of that first scene. But I assume we count that. Talking about Kilgore, I do want to talk about him more specifically. I don't know if this is the part. It's such a different character to Tom Hagen, where Tom Hagen in The Godfather is sort of the moderate one, and is sort of maybe the less, like, Sonny is right there, and he's sort of the big alpha male one, as evidenced with his giant penis, as we understand. Whereas Hagen gets to be sort of the more moderate one. Whereas in this, he's sort of the ultimate meme alpha male commander dude, where he's like not flinching at explosions and is grabbing his dick all the time, and he's walking around and just not the stroke. We're talking about we're thinking about penises now. The strut is what I was looking for. As he walks around, how he speaks, it's still that same. It's funny because the Godfather speaking pattern is kind of interesting and feels very dated. Like the senator is talking the same way as the general in this movie, and I assume that's just how he talks, and it's an old-timey way of speaking. But it does feel kind of romanticized and old, and so does the way Robert Duvall talks, which is interesting. But the way he speaks is slightly different to Tom Hagen, to the point where it feels more masculine almost. Tom Hagen isn't very masculine. But yeah, it's just, and he seems so tall, and everything, and he's got his fucking meme cowboy hat looking hat on. Just delightful when he's on screen doing absolutely awful things. His fucking death card thing. It's just a meme. It's like everything that he does is like, oh, that's brilliant. That's just great. Like him going to give the one Viet Cong soldier thing. You're gonna get some characterization of like, oh, he like does respect the enemy a little bit, and these and the Vietnamese people, but then he immediately gets distracted and doesn't give him the water because he wants to go and meet the famous surfer dude who is Lance, who shows up, and it's just like, this is everything about it. It rides the line of like, this is almost a comedy scene, but it doesn't ever go into parody. It's just sort of like a sick, dark humor thing to it, or a black comedy shade to it. It's just great. We will talk more about Robert Duvall later, because my goodness, he's also in the conversation or whatever. We're gonna watch more Robert Duvall stuff. That's my main takeaway. Speaking of more shit we've got to watch, this fucking Marlon Brando prick is probably the best actor of all time. I feel like last time, was it last time? No, why would we have been talking about Al Pacino last time? And if it was in the RE bit that I didn't record. I was having a conversation, might have been on the most recent stream, which was ages ago. I might have said that Al Pacino is the best actor of all time, and he's very directed and pointed and sort of my taste of sort of just being explosive. Brando isn't really like that, though he kind of is like that. And kind of is always on the tipping point in this movie. But my goodness, just the commanding presence, everything. Just, this bastard is so good. Obviously, and this is where the metatext elements sort of come in and sort of help the movie, where it's like, Marlon Brando's in the movie, and even with Robert Duvall to a lesser degree, you're like, oh, when are they going to show up? I want to see these characters. Let me just make a note to talk about Robert Duvall later. And in that scene where Martin Sheen's getting his orders, and it's like, oh, this is Commander Kurtz, and this is confirmed to be his voice, and the Brando voice starts, you get the fucking soy boy chills, like you've just seen the fucking Millennium Falcon in the Star Wars Force Awakens or whatever fucking trailer. It's like, holy fuck, God is here. Maybe literally in this movie. And just the way in that initial monologue through the tape is so good. Like, I had a dream of a snail crawling along a razor blade, and the worst thing is it survived or something, and then it goes into a monologue how we have to complete annihilation or whatever is the final line. It's just like chilling, and it's like, but there's so much weight to it in the performance. It adds so many layers to it, because initially it's very thoughtful, it's very dreamlike, like a snail crawling across a razor blade. What weird imagery to have thought of. So it's like, oh, he's an interesting, like, introspective person, but it's also very violent, and the way he's speaking is sort of in a hurt, hushed tone that's very thoughtful and seems intelligent, but then the conclusion to everything he says is like wanted violence and murder, and it's like a chilling. But you can tell that it's not just like, oh, we're going to meet him, he's going to be the crazy dude, and he's going to be a crazy, erratic bad guy like the Joker or something, where maybe it's thoughtful and interesting and sort of out of the box, but in the end it's just like, I'm the chaos dude, or whatever the fuck the Joker's dumb meme is. You can very quickly tell that he's not going to be like, it creates him as such like this enigma that we want to spend 2 hours on a journey on a boat up a river to go and meet. And like, what's he going to be like when we meet him? And they kind of have the berserk portrait of a lady on fire meme moment where it's the looking back at you thing, where at the end when they finally do meet, and and I think, because obviously we're like, oh, we can't wait to meet him throughout the whole movie, and it is a march towards Colonel Schultz. But we get there and we realize that, oh, he was anticipating us coming too. And he has a line to Martin Sheen where he's like, you are kind of what I expected. Am I what you expected? Of sort of like, the more we thought about it and anticipated meeting him, he was thinking about it and anticipating us, which is like the portrait scene where Marianne memes on Heloise and is like, I've noticed all your little tics, and she sort of uses it to embarrass her. But plot twist, Heloise immediately afterwards reverses the roles and points out all her little quirks, and it's like, as you stand over there watching me, I'm watching you, and that's a more interesting metatext thing because it's about painting and her posing as the subject of the painting, and it's sort of like a thing of like the subject you were looking at is also looking at you. Ties into the berserk thing. It's the more the abyss looks into you, the more you look into it, it looks back into you, reflecting what you become. There's sort of two different things, but they're both embodied in the final bit in Apocalypse Now. But a very important thing is that once we meet Brando at the end, it's entirely worth it, and we get a few more monologues before he dies at the end. The funny thing is, again, the only thing I've ever seen Marlon Brando in, I've seen the Contenders scene from On the Waterfront. Is that what that movie's called? That's probably the next Brando movie we'll do, and we will probably do it shortly. I think that movie came out in 1948, I saw. It could have been a contender, that whole monologue, when he's much younger. So I'd seen that, and the only other thing I'd ever seen him in was The Godfather. So the way he looked in this movie especially was interesting and different. Because he doesn't look like Vito Corleone in this movie. He doesn't have the cotton balls in his cheeks, and he's got no hair, etc. And obviously that's a big point because he's shrouded in sort of darkness when we first are taken into his chambers, if you will. It's just what a performance. Drink break. And it. Where do we go from here? Do we just talk about the ending? Because I think I should get back to the confounding point. Confounding. Does this word mean what I think it means? Confounding. Cause surprise or confusion in someone, especially not according to their expectations. I think that's exactly what I mean. Mix up something or something with something else. Probably not that one, but the first definition makes kind of says what I was trying to say. Because in The Lighthouse, you're constantly trying to figure out, okay, what's the point here, sort of thematically, what's going on. I feel like that's what I was trying to figure out also throughout this movie. And it's interesting because obviously it's a Vietnam movie, but from what I understand about Francis Ford Coppola and the fact that this is sort of heralded as a great movie, it's probably not a, yeah, boys, let's go kill these fucking Vietnamese type Vietnam movie. It's probably going to be about America being bad. But it's really not. It's, well, that stuff's all there, obviously, the Kilgore stuff, etc. But the whole time when you're introduced to, like, the rogue colonel and that he needs to be taken out, my immediate thought was, oh, he's probably learnt that America, or discovered through being a colonel or whatever, that America is in the wrong in this war and has sided with the Viet Cong, who they keep calling Charlie throughout the movie, which was a term I didn't know, but I did pick up on. So if you're going to go watch this movie, Charlie means the Viet Cong. At least that's what I've assumed. Maybe there'll be a YouTube comment telling me that I've misinterpreted it all and I have to reinterpret everything. But we'll see. Nonetheless, where are we up to? Oh, the theme of the movie and the America stuff. It ends up not being that at all. But that's immediately what I assumed. Oh, he's now anti-American, and we're going to start off being like sort of neutral, as I assume many American viewers would be, going in and being like, oh, we're a soldier going over to fight for America, and then slowly learning through the journey that America is doing horrific things to the Vietnamese people and etc. And then we would learn to basically be with Kurtz, because there's like 3 resolutions to the movie. He actually finds him and kills him, which seems impossible, even though that is kind of the one that does happen. But obviously there's a twist to it, because that's like the plan. The plan never works. We meet him and we end up through the journey realizing that he's right and we join him. Or 3, there's some sort of middling twist. These are sort of the only 3 options here. And initially you're like, oh, it's probably going to be that one. And they actually build on that in the movie, where it's like, oh, we're going to join him or whatever. Because obviously Kurtz is very interesting. He is made likable a little bit through his monologues, and they're very thoughtful. And he's made this enigma. So you're almost like, oh, I wonder what this fella's about. Should we follow him or should we not? And then at some point, our main character gets a note that somebody actually previously was sent on this exact same mission, and they are now fighting with Kurt. So it's like, there probably is some sort of method here. Method, probably not the correct word to use, unless we're using it in a very specific context when talking about this movie. But even that's subverted, because when we meet that one dude, I forget his name. Is it Al? Maybe not. He's like completely comatose and is all fucked up and maybe brainwashed. So it wasn't even that. Now, the twist is in the movie, again, if you haven't seen the movie, is that Munchkin goes to meet him. Initially, he is captured and he is at odds. Chef is killed, decapitated, his head's put in his lap by Kurtz, etc. But then this all happens and is framed oddly at the end. But eventually he does empathize with Kurtz, I think, and Kurtz's wish, because he may or may not have malaria. My interpretation was that he did, because when we initially go to meet him, like, we get the Sheen voiceover where he's like, as I approached his bed chamber or whatever, I could smell death and slow death and malaria or something. So I think it's assumed that he has some sort of a disease and that he doesn't get to die like a big, strong soldier. He's going to wither away in bed, because obviously when we first meet him, he's lying down in bed all in shadow, and then he sits up and sort of rinses his face off. So yeah, and then he wants the main character to kill him in sort of a warrior sense, with he ends up doing with like this big machete knife thing, and to go and tell his kid about what he did and why he did it, and is sort of given his memoirs that he takes with him. But even then, it's still all hard to draw conclusions from the movie, because there's on one page it's scribbled like exterminate them all, which could mean, like, I have no idea what it means. It could mean that he wants to exterminate all because he's sort of created this is something that has to be explained. He's created this sort of mini, like, empire thing that he rules over as sort of like this god. But it's of all native Cambodians. Cambodia, I assume, borders Vietnam. It has to, because they go through the river through Vietnam up to Cambodia, where Kurtz has sort of settled. And it's basically a bunch of sort of, I nearly said Colombians. Cambodian. If you would have asked me, I would have said Cambodia was in South America, because I would have confused it with Colombia. But it's not, it's in Asia, apparently. So there's a bunch of natives that he's sort of ruling over. So I don't know if the exterminate them all is like, oh, he wants them killed, like he wants his own like civilization blown up, or if he wants the Viet Cong blown up, or if he wants the Americans blown up, or if he just wants all of humanity blown up. But it's very interesting, and it's sort of like, what is Sheen's interpretation of all of this at the end? When he, he's clearly won over a little bit by Kurtz and is going to go and tell, because assumingly the monologue he's been giving throughout the entire movie, he's giving to his son or to somebody, because the framing of it is to tell Kurtz's story first, I must tell my own. So we are seeing the version of his story that he is going to use as a preface to tell Kurtz's story to somebody, presumably the son. So yeah, I'm still trying to grasp what exactly was going on. But to step back a minute, the framing of the whole movie, right, is that they're going up the river, and a few things are happening as they go up the river. It slowly gets more and more surreal, because it's kind of actually like a psychological horror movie, I guess. If we go into genres here on Letterboxd, is it going to say that? No, it just has war and drama. Themes: war and historical adventure, political and human rights, war, soldiers, combat. It's got a bunch of shit. But it's basically a psychology movie, I guess, about depravity and morality and duality or whatever. Now, in my reading, and by reading I mean watching YouTube videos, I'm pretty sure. No, I think I read like the Wikipedia article a little bit. Apparently, a bunch of this movie is based off a novella that came out in the late 1800s about Congo, that they sort of modernized to throw in Vietnam, which is most of the Kurtz stuff. It might even be the same name of, like, there is a Walter Kirks in that, Kurtz. And it's about, I nearly said gentrifying. Not gentrifying, colonizing Africa and sort of the horrors, and for a book written and set in the late 1800s, it's very anti-colonialism in a lot of ways, and sort of pointing a finger at the white man for being the savage instead of black people, which would have been probably the presumed thing at the time. Did I say that the novel is called Heart of Darkness? Now, the documentary is like Apocalypse Now, Heart of Darkness or something, so they probably talk about this a lot in the documentary. Again, a documentary I haven't watched. I probably should watch someday. I do want to read that. I'm very interested, so maybe at some point. But But yeah, so it's sort of the psychology of that embedded into the movie. But going up the river, things slowly get more and more surreal. Like and also this is doubled, which is why I took that note to say we got to get back to talking about the French at some point. It's also doubles as going through time almost up the river and the history of the area. I think I saw a Coppola quote talking about. Because we have the initial stuff where we are given the mission, then we meet Robert Duvall's gang, and they sort of get them into the mouth of the river by blowing up this village of Vietnamese outpost, Viet Cong outpost. Then they're on the boat, and it's just like the 5 characters. And obviously, as we progress, people die, it gets more surreal, and it seems like we're going back in time. Now, sort of having a Vietnam War, you sort of think, war movie rather, you sort of think, oh, we sort of know it's going to be rather realistic, there's going to be military stuff, there's going to be... That's sort of going to be the setting dressing, is you know what to think of when you think of, like, Vietnam War setting dressing. Lots of greens, lots of jungle, etc. It's not really that. We get a lot of different colors as we go up the river. It feels surreal, surrealist in every sense. But yeah, this also doubles as going back in time, because apparently a big thing that was cut originally, that again is put back into later versions of this movie, is one of the first stops they make is to sort of this French plantation that seems like it's from like the 1800s or something, because I assume France in the 1800s or maybe even the 1900s, I'm not sure when, tried to colonize Vietnam as well. The French were colonizing a bunch of things. And then, obviously, at the end, we're with sort of native Asian people, Southeast Asian Cambodians. So as you continue to progress up the river, it sort of goes back in time and back in time. And also, we sort of slowly lose our minds as we're doing it. So it all mirrors. And and I don't think I was thinking about that cognizantly as I was watching the movie, but having that explained to me. Even the poster is of the river slowly going up. And it just, I don't know, it all clicks and it feels rewarding. We were building up to a bigger point there, but I forget what it is. We were trying to figure out the theme and the point. I think everything in this movie is slightly off in a good way. Like, you feel like, oh, the generic setup is that we're going to meet Kurtz and he's going to be the good guy and we're going to fight against the bad power that is America. If the movie was made in 2022, that's probably how it would function. If it was made in 1952, it would probably be America, fuck yeah, let's go kill these fucking Vietnamese. It is interesting that it's made in sort of that milling period of nearly the 80s, late 70s. And every time you think you know where it's going, it does something weird. Like there's even the journalist character at the end. Dennis Hopper is the actor's name. I was like, it's some famous fucking actor, but I couldn't remember the name, but I did. And his character is like weirdly annoying and anxious and says a million things at once. And it's so interesting how Brando's character interacts with him. Like, he overhears him monologuing to Sheen, and like he starts throwing the books at him and being like, you fucking mutt or whatever when he says something he disagrees with. And the point I was trying to make thematically is sort of like, it's hard to tell what the movie is saying, I think, because it's not saying a more traditional like message, but in some senses it is, because vaguely and reductively the message is kind of that humanity is terrible now. And there's sort of a lot of could be edgy platitudes in the movie. Like the last lines of the movie are Brando as he's dying, all cut open, like whispering the horror. And the way he says it's so haunting, it's fucking sick. And it's probably in a bunch of fucking edited music videos, and it's fucking sick. But yeah, like that could be an edgy platitude, because he has a bunch of monologues throughout the movie about like, you must make horror your friend to win at war or whatever. It's like, I could see this being pulled off in such a bad way and being so generic and so like, oh, been there, done that, we've heard this a million times. Like it's almost generic bad guy monologuing, but that's sort of the point of the movie and sort of a twist, and our main character is sort of won over by this, and it's not sort of like an initially he's won over type thing, like he's flirting with the dark side and then he goes back to the good. That's not the resolution of the movie. Now, obviously, part of it might be that the point is more generic and it's just like, oh, war breaks people. Because initially, the reason why they want to kill Marlon Brando's character is because it's evident that he's gone insane or whatever, is what the general says at the beginning. After he goes through monologues about how he was the greatest fucking soldier this country ever produced, and he even like talks about him longingly personally, which is, again, a great little detail. And then you get to him and you sort of can't tell if he's insane or if he's crazy or if this is sort of the point. And it's just, I don't know, it's hard to figure out, but it's sort of an enigma of a thing to try and figure out, which is Marlon Brando's character. Because he has that monologue. Every monologue he has, I feel like I rewatched today, because he doesn't have that many, and they're all like great because they're fucking Marlon Brando monologues. The monologue about how they gave vaccines to a bunch of the Vietnamese civilians, and they came back 2 days later, and like the locals had cut off all the arms they had injected vaccines into to prove a point. And we're expecting him to be like, and that's what broke me, and that's why I hate the Vietnamese people. But instead, in the twist, which is, it's almost as generic as the not twist, because all of this has been done so much, is that like, no, he respects them for that, and he's like, he says the genius of that or something. But the way he does it leaves it at sort of this layered, nuanced middle ground that's so interesting to think about. Like, why does this character respect them from doing that? And then he sort of revels and says, like, if I had 10 divisions of men like that, this war our problems here would be over or something, he says. It's sort of like what? Just because they're ruthless, or because they would kill anybody that would even take tacit help from the enemy type things? I guess a lot of it is left sort of ambiguous for you to think about. I guess more so the words are left ambiguous, but the feeling of the scenes and the layers of the performance sort of speak to you. So even if you get lost in the monologues and the themes a little bit, you're sort of told how to feel about situations just by the emotions and the imagery and the performance and how they all combined to portray those emotions. It's very interesting towards the end. I think I should talk about my journey with the movie, because initially I was kind of just like, I think I was starting to say this earlier, but as we were going through, I was never bored, but it felt meandering in a way that isn't coupled with it dragging or wasting my time. Or it's sort of like, what are we doing here? And by the end, I didn't figure it out. Like, the ending wasn't a revelation. Obviously, it is a cool ending, and I did feel like the emotions of the ending, and then he comes out, all the people bow, and he just grabs Lance and he leaves, and them taking off, and there's some relief there, and there's some hesitancy there, and you feel those emotions, and I still feel those emotions still thinking about it. Like, that's maintained my interpretation of it. But it sort of just took some thinking about, because even when I was initially talking to Miller in that conversation I was talking about having earlier, I had given it 4 stars, but sort of when I don't know how I feel about a movie, I seem to give it 4 stars because I didn't have a bad time and it seemed like some artsy stuff was happening. I did that with The Lighthouse, but The Lighthouse maintained at 4 stars and will probably until I rewatch it. But the more I thought about it, and the more it's like I just let it settle, certain things stuck out to me as sort of great. Like, even as I was watching it, I think I thought some of the performances were underwhelming. I think I might have thought Robert Duvall's performance was underwhelming. And sort of maybe even understated to the degree I wish it was, where we didn't spend every time with him just talking or monologuing, which is maybe what I would have wanted at the time, but he was doing things, and they were in the planes and playing the Valkyrie song and coming down in the fucking helicopters and shit. And he's given his fucking iconic, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, or the less iconic, which the more poignant line, and maybe the best line in the film, is his, one day this war's going to end, and the reaction he has on his face and how he says that line and how much it portrays sort of a regret. That monologue is so good. I guess we're tangenting. We were talking about I thought about it more, and I watched some scenes, and I sort of had a realization that actually I really do like this movie, and that's why I gave it 4.5 stars. I wouldn't say it's a 5-star movie yet. It sort of has to, maybe it'll get that way if it sits with me for a little while, or if I rewatch it, or if I think about it more, or if I watch some more thematic analyses, or read some good comments on this video or something. Maybe it'll bump up, and I can think my way into a 5-star, but right now it's staying at 4.5. Right now I think that's an honest reflection of where I'm at. The Robert Duvall stuff, I promised we would get back to him. The monologue he has, because obviously I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It's like because a lot of it, if you just looked at it on paper, and again, if you were to be reductive, you'd be like, oh, it's just like the most simple juxtaposition in the world. He loves the smell of napalm in the morning. Napalm is a horrible, terrible thing that kills hundreds of thousands of people, as does he, and in torturous, terrible deaths, but he's liking the smell from a distance in the morning. Like, it's a clever way to start your day. And obviously that line is delivered very straight, like, I love the smell of toast in the morning or something. And it's almost, again, that dark black comedy type thing of, it's funny because he just said, I love killing people, but he didn't say it so directly. But there's a nuance in the context of the line, because you kind of do like Robert Duvall's character just because he's such we've been saying enigma a lot in this movie, in this movie night rather. Because he is such a thing, you feel like, yeah, there's totally a reality where I die for this man to try and get his approval because look at him. And Martin Sheen even has a monologue about that when he's introducing those characters. Like, there's like a glimpse or a glistening light that comes off of him, and all his men feel invincible around him because he portrays himself as invincible. Did I say invisible? I meant invincible. With Robert Duvall's character, with Kilgore. So yeah, the building up that you kind of like him, even though you know you shouldn't. He's doing these horrible things. That tied with it, and then him delivering the line. It adds like a layer where it just adds so much to what the line means and how it makes you feel when you hear it. It's sort of like you want to chuckle and you almost respect it for its ballsiness, and then there's also the juxtaposition stuff. So there's like layers to what make it an interesting, good, thought-provoking line. But then he goes on. Then he continues explaining in the monologue. If you just watched the top 10 movie quotes of all time, you'd only get that line. You wouldn't get the stuff afterwards where he's like, that gasoline smell or whatever, and he's saying it the Robert Duvall way, and it's so cool. And he's like, it smells like victory. And it's like, it's another one of those lines that means so much, because again, it's like, victory by killing people, that's kind of bad, and like, probably shouldn't be how we think about things. But then he believes it so genuinely, and it's just like but he also has some hesitancy that he might actually doubt it as he's saying it, and then he finishes the monologue with, and one day, fellas, this war is going to end. And then initially, because of the victory line, he realizes that he's supposed to be happy because victory means they win and means everything they've done is validated, but it also means he has to stop having all this fun he's having at war, and also means that he would sort of be more irrelevant. And sort of, if you watch his facial expressions, as he gives the line, after he gives that line, and then when he stands up to walk away, he sort of throws something along the ground, but it's not a violent throw. It's just sort of like as you're getting up, you've been picking the grass, and it's that conversation's over, time to walk away. Cool throw the grass into the breeze throw. And I don't know, the facial expression, it goes from like a smirk to a sad smile to a genuine smile to a like almost happy smirk, and it's just like, man, there's so much, like, this character's been on screen for 11 minutes, and I feel like there's so much to read into his character and what he thinks and his incentive structure and sort of how perverse it is. Perverse? I don't know how to fucking say the word properly. It's just so interesting. Again, 11 minutes of screen time for this character. Now, obviously, as every fucking YouTube video seems to be about, and every comment section wants to let you know, if you didn't already figure it out, is that obviously Kilgore and Kurtz are supposed to be juxtapositions themselves. One's bombastic, one's solemn, one sort of is bought into this American notion of how the war is going to play out and how they're going to win it. One's disenfranchised. One's succeeding up the ladder by killing people. One's falling down the ladder and needs to be assassinated for not killing people, it seems. Even though, because there's a whole subplot, one of the main reasons why they want Brando's character killed is because he killed 3 potential undercover double agents, but he didn't get permission for it. But that seems to have prevented a lot of death, so there's moral questions around that. And also, Brando's character, again, we were sort of touching on this earlier, not being fully anti-American by the end, sort of is like, what is his opinion on the war currently? Like, it is part of his insanity sour grapes from being disenfranchised from his country. Also, a thing that I don't really understand fully is why such a big deal is made about him not going for general, but instead entering an entry-level course in sort of the Air Force, where he wants to learn how to fly planes and or jump out of planes. I thought that was going to come back somehow. And maybe it didn't, I just missed it, and that's how he got into Columbia or something. But a lot is made of that. But I can't entirely figure it out. When I talked about the power of performance, and I talked about the megatext thing, I don't know if I said it in such plain words or if I built up to it and forgot, but the point was supposed to be that, like, oh my god, you want to see Marlon Brando, because Marlon Brando was the coolest actor of all time, and you go into the movie knowing that Marlon Brando is going to be in this movie and anticipating it, so it gives even more weight to you wanting to meet Kurtz at the end, because you know Marlon Brando is going to be in the movie when you see it, so it's sort of like a drive and incentive for us want to root for the characters to get there. I guess I didn't really talk much about the boat gang. We sort of feel for them as they die one by one. I wouldn't say too profusely. It is interesting that the surfer dude survives the whole thing. There is something about how he's grabbed at the end for them to leave that reminded me of something, and it felt so apt and so like, yeah, this is the proper ending for him to have survived. It's funny because he makes a lot of very stupid decisions throughout the movie. But I guess thematically it might be because he's never really portrayed as being afraid. Like, he's kind of selfless in some sense. Like, after they lose the dog, which how they get the dog is all fucked up and them killing the civilians, and the one girl they thought was jumping for a weapon, but she was jumping to protect the dog, and they shot the fuck out of her with a machine gun. What was I talking about? The boat characters. Oh, and why Lance gets to survive. Well, after they lose the dog, he wants to go back, even though obviously they would die if they all went back. And he's sitting on top. I guess another big thing that we should talk about before we leave. How long have we been going? Nearly an hour and 10 minutes. Fuck me. Another thing we should talk about is sort of the scene when they get to the bridge. Oh, there are a bunch of stops we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the Playboy show. Another big theme of the movie is sort of American mismanagement of the war and how sort of the incompetent people are being allowed to lead. And that might be a thing with Kilgore, whereas he's just like blowing up certain destinations just so he can go surfing and kill it. Because obviously on a surface level, it's like, how moral to kill a whole village of people just so you can surf or whatever. But on another level, it's like, he's also using a lot of military resources in a war they're trying to win to capture an outpost so they can go surfing, Lamau. Whereas, and this is sort of things that Kurtz might resent as sort of a more intelligent commander. But like the Playboy show is a terrible idea, but it happens anyway. I guess the Playboy show is interesting. I guess it gets into sort of the psychology of strip clubs in real life, where it's like, how is this? I don't know. I've never been at war, separated, surrounded by exclusively men for like months at a time, where the sight of a pretty girl or something is like euphoric, and maybe that is the experience. But like, it's not like they're prostitutes. You don't get to sleep with or touch these women. It's sort of the strip club thing of like, why do we go here? Why would we want to see the show of, and they don't even get naked, which, I mean, the movies are 18 plus. I assume they could have if they wanted to have that in the movie. But they're just like sort of awkwardly dancing in a very like, I don't know, 70s style. And like the stage gets stormed as they want like autographs, or maybe they were trying to rape the Playboy bunnies. I don't know what was happening, but they're sort of all in a stand because they get flown into Vietnam and then flown out in the chopper. I assume the government like pays them to do this, the Playboy people, because there's clearly, is Hugh Hefner the Playboy dude? There might be a Hugh Hefner type, or there's a sleazy Playboy dude who comes in and is like, ready for the show or whatever, who's clearly like sort of their pimp, for lack of a better word. But just weird, and slowly you're like, man, aren't men just stupid, and people are losing their mind, and who in charge thought this was a good idea? And we sort of see this through Martin Sheen's eyes. And then the next step is they get to the like completely lawless bridge fight where they show up trying to look for a commanding officer so that they can get assistance in moving further up the river. And we sort of go through this 10-minute sequence, probably not that long, probably like a 3 or 4 minute sequence of Lance and Martin Sheen's character walking through the trenches and stuff and observing a lot of fighting that's going on over this bridge, and how they build it every day only for it to get blown up at night. And he's looking for a commanding officer, and he keeps asking everybody, and they have no idea. He asks one dude, and he says, "Isn't it you?" As he's just firing the machine gun. After he yells at him one time, it's a cute sequence. And then there's one other dude who seems to be like the best fighter there, and it sort of wins the night for them with his grenade launcher and whatever. And then afterwards, again, after like the fighting stops, we got the one Viet Cong dude screaming, who's still alive, who's fucking them up, is screaming like, fuck you GI, over and over again. Kind of cute. Gets killed though, gets blown up. And the dude that blows him up, who is completely emotionless, and the war is completely ruined, and he is all fucked up, and he's like, and then Martin Sheen's character, and also it's got the great lighting thing. We didn't even talk about lighting once in this movie yet. We got all these flares going off, all the reds, and eventually they use color brilliantly. Cinematography is really cool, coming up and out of water, like where Charles Vane in season 2, episode 8 of Black Sails, I assume. Maybe it's at the end of episode 9, probably, huh? Maybe not. Whatever. But yeah, the cinematography and everything, and in this scene specifically, like there's like a rotating light, and you go into darkness, and then you see flashes of Martin Sheen's face, and it keeps going like that. It's fucking sick. But he's like, do you know who the commanding officer is here? And the dude just says, yeah, and then giggles and then stumbles away. It's just such a great line of like, this is completely gone to madness. There's nobody in charge here. We're just fighting over and over again every night, seemingly forever. With no end in sight and no plan. Just a bunch of foot soldiers who have been sort of abandoned. America loses this war. I think that's the commentary we're getting. But yeah, because even the dude, like there is a dude there to give Martin Sheen's character papers specifically, but he's like, have fun, I'm leaving, welcome to the asshole of the world or whatever. And it's like, this is hell. It's all red and stuff and dark. So it's it's playing into the surrealist angle before we started getting to all the spooky tribe stuff with the severed heads and idols and stuff like that around to spook you. But yes, we talked about the bridge, the crew on the boat. There was another Black Lagoon reference that I wanted to bring up. And it wasn't just like the vague Vietnam things, but I can't remember it now. We gotta keep the anime people around with something. Fuck, what Vietnam thing specifically? Obviously they're on a boat and it's a small crew, but that wasn't what I was thinking of either. It was a very ancillary element. That was weird that I connected, but I'd forgotten it. Unfortunate. Dutch was in Vietnam. Boat. I'm trying to play word association game to see if it jogs my memory, but I can't do it. My voice is starting to hurt a little bit. I do have a bit of a cough, so maybe that's why. We're only an hour and 14 minutes in. This is piss week. Why is my throat already getting fucked up? I don't know if this has been a good recording session. I feel like the Casablanca one was bad. Some of the other ones have been good and very pointed. This one, we probably should have done notes for, but didn't. If we had done the notes, I would have remembered the Black Lagoon point. I feel like we've hit on the broad strokes, though, right? I'm going through my tabs I have open here. I have the Coppola one. I got Google Images open. There's nothing on images jogging my memory of anything else to talk about. I see a big image with George Lucas. It says, George Lucas was originally supposed to direct Apocalypse Now, ? Collider article. Probably not going to read that one. But right now we're standing at 4.5 stars. What a wacky, confounding, thought-provoking movie All Apocalypse Now was. Let's see if the hentai we watch next week, 1001 Nights. Apparently, the best version of this movie, by the way, I found was just on YouTube. Not for Apocalypse Now, but for 1000 Nights. I haven't actually watched it yet, in case you were wondering, but yeah. So it'll be easy to watch for everybody that wants to follow along. But I think we're ending it. I think that's what I'm doing here. I'm setting up for the big finale. 4.5 stars, Apocalypse Now. Enjoyed my time thoroughly. If we were to rank the movie night movies, Blonde is still the best, obviously. Casablanca is still probably number 2. I'd probably say Apocalypse Now is probably number 3. Then Gaslight, Roger Rabbit, The Lighthouse, they're all kind of 4 stars, and Scarface is the worst one so far because we didn't like that movie too much, huh? But yeah, that was our fun little rankings. 1001 Nights next. Then we'll be back with another movie after that, I'm sure. This one probably went out a little bit late, or I think it'll be a week and a day from the last one, but that's because I put the last one out a little early because it was all fucked up. We remember that. Nonetheless, be back here next week. We're going to talk about movies. We're having fun with movie night. I like watching movies. Who knew? Gives you things to think about. Opens your mind. Expands your brain. All the good things. Gives you something to think about at work while you're piling away fucking... I don't want to be specific about what I'm piling away. You ain't going to find me at work. Nonetheless, I think that's where we say our famous outro line. Support links in the description below. Thanks.